Some people do that on purpose. There we go. Nope. Pastors are not perfect. I know. Just try to deal with that. Just try to deal with that disappointment. All right. We're in a series called Knowing God, and really the gist of it is that there's a difference between knowing God and knowing about God. In the same way that we can know about a celebrity or a historical figure, we can know facts about them, it does not mean that we know them. To truly know someone, and this is true in our relationships, we have to experience them. We have to experience an encounter with them. And the same is true with God. But here's the good news. God can be known, and we can know God personally. Most powerfully, most clearly through Jesus. And today we're continuing this. We kicked it off last week and talked about the difference between knowing God and knowing about God. And I love this quote from Martin Lloyd-Jones, a dead pastor. The dead people have the best quotes. I am not asking whether you know things about him, but do you know God? Are you enjoying God? Is God the center of your life, the soul of your being, the source of your greatest joy? He is meant to be. God does not desire just to be a part of your life where, we segment our lives and we have our work and we have our relationships and we have our family life and then, there's the God part. And we just sort of pay attention to each of those segments. No, God is meant to be everything, the source of our greatest joy. So I want to ask you, is he the source of your greatest joy? And you don't have to shout it out loud, but if you answer that question to yourself, and if he's not, I'm glad you're here. If he is, I'm glad you're here. If you are not even sure you believe this whole Christianity thing, I'm glad you're here. If you've been a Christian and walked with Jesus for 40 years, I'm glad you're here. If you've walked with Jesus for 4 months, I'm glad you're here. I want all of us to experience God. And knowing God is on a different level than knowing about God. And we know God, one of the primary ways that we know God are through his attributes that make him who he is, God's character. And we're going to be walking through some of those in this series, Knowing God. Here's my goal. My goal is when we get to the end of this series, you don't just know things about God. Okay, if that's the case, I have failed. But if you know God in a more personal way, I have achieved the goal. And one of his primary attributes is, and what we're talking about today, is his sovereignty. Okay, say that 10 times fast to your neighbor. His sovereignty. I barely know how to spell it, okay? It is a theological word, but my goal is to make this theological word practical. And because here's the deal. What you believe determines how you behave. What you believe determines how you behave. I may not know you personally or know a lot about you yet, but I know that what you believe determines how you behave. And what you believe about God determines how you live your life. And God's sovereignty is essentially that God is in control of everything, that he is in control of everything. There's a couple of key texts, two of many, but Psalm 115 verse 3 says, our God is in heaven, he does whatever pleases him. Our God is in heaven, he does whatever pleases him. Not, I know some of you who may be married or, you're like, well, I do whatever I want, you're wrong. But God does whatever pleases him. Job 42, verse 2 says, I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted. Essentially, there's nothing that happens outside of God's knowledge and power. Okay, God knew that you would be here today. God knew the kind of week that you would have last week. Some of you may be like, well, I wish you would have given me a heads up, because if I'd have known how my week last week was going to go, I could have maybe changed some things or, figured out a plan to how I was going to respond to that one person. God knew the kind of week you were going to have last week. God knows the week you're going to have this coming week. He knows everything that's going to happen. There's nothing that surprises him. There's nothing that's outside of his knowledge and his power. Now, we go one of two ways with this. We either go the way of, okay, well, does that mean that God controls everything? That every event and every decision is totally controlled by God, so much so that my decisions are insignificant and I'm not responsible for them? No, it does not mean that. If you saw the movie The Matrix years ago, the character in the movie, Neo, takes the red pill, and what happens? He's opened up to this reality that humanity is just controlled by machines, and we're all just subjected to the machine. That is not what it means to believe in God's sovereignty, nor does it mean the opposite. What's the opposite? Well, do we determine the course of history? Do our decisions basically determine everything that's going to happen, and God merely permits them? The answer is also no. Just imagine that I'm standing up here and I'm holding on to two ropes, and those two ropes go up into the ceiling. And in the ceiling is a pulley, a wheel that, the rope fits over the wheel, and that's how it hangs down. And I'm hanging on to each side of the rope, with the pulley securing it in the top of the ceiling. We're going to actually do that. Next week, I'm going to come down from the roof. It's going to be great. Invite your friends. But just imagine one side of the rope is God's power. And maybe this side of the room. Okay, you're God's power. Just say God's power. Okay, and this side of the room, just imagine you are human responsibility. Say human responsibility. That's so exciting, isn't it? God's power, human responsibility. If I let go of one side of the rope, what happens? I fall. If I'm in the air, suspended in the air, hanging on to the rope, both sides, if I let one side go, I'm going to fall. That is how God's power and human responsibility work together. We are not machines at the controls of a God that's just pulling our strings like a puppet. Nor do we control everything that happens in history, and our decisions determine the course of history. It is a balance of God's power and human responsibility. Theologian Norman Geisler said it this way: for God determined that moral creatures, that's you and me, would do things freely. He did not determine that they would be forced to perform free acts. What is forced is not free, and what is free is not forced. In brief, we are chosen but free. Chosen but free. I love that line, because anytime someone asks me, do you believe in predestination? I say, yes, it's in the Bible. If it's in the Bible, I believe it, okay? Oh, well, do you believe in free will? Yes. Yes, I do. It's in the Bible. I believe that God knows every act that I will freely choose to do. Now, some of you are like, oh, that's just a play on words. Like, you're just trying to reconcile one and one to the other. No, I'm not. I'm trying to explain how God's power and human responsibility work together. If I walk outside this evening and it's pitch black, we know it's going to be like 20 degrees. But it's pitch black and there's a spotlight that comes down on me. And I can see only a few feet in front of me, my next few steps. But that's it. I cannot see beyond the few feet that I will take my next steps. That is how, another way to think about God's power and my responsibility working together. I freely choose to take those steps. But it is within God's knowledge and power that I do that. In other words, God lets me see only what's right in front of me, not what's over the horizon. I don't know the future. I don't know what's going to happen next week or next month or next year. And that is where I trust in God and his power and knowledge. He is all powerful and all knowledgeable. He knows every act that I will freely choose to do. Now, does that absolve me from my responsibility? No. So this afternoon, when I go home and I take a spiritual nap, which is an act of worship, and I would encourage you to do the same. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is take a nap. I know, I went to seminary, I have a master's, that's the best spiritual advice I have. Take a nap. Thousands of dollars led me to give you that advice. Take a nap. If I take a nap and I wake up from the nap and I go, you know what, I'm hungry. It's 3 o'clock and I'm hungry. I'm just going to trust God to satisfy my hunger. I'm just going to lay here on the couch and trust God to satisfy my hunger. God, will you just satisfy my hunger right this minute? No, I'm going to get up. I'm going to go to the fridge. I'm going to get a snack. Okay? The same is true with God's knowledge and our responsibility. I still have to get up and go to the fridge. I still have to get groceries. If I sat at my laptop tomorrow and said, God, I'm just going to trust you. I'm going to trust you to pay this utility bill. I'm not going to pay it. I'm going to trust that you will pay it. What's going to happen? Well, my power's going to get cut off. I still have to pay the bill. I still have to go to the grocery store. I still have to do the things that God has asked me to do, called me to do. I still have to take the steps. Within his knowledge and power, God's sovereignty does not exclude human responsibility or human involvement. Sometimes we think it's one or the other. It is both. So here's a simple way to think about it. God is completely in charge. And also, what you do matters. God is completely in charge of everything that happens, and what you do matters. One of my favorite examples of this is found in the book of Acts, chapter 27. And Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament, went on a missionary journey, and at the end of the missionary journey, they're headed to Rome. Rome was like where he was hoping to end up. It was like, I want to make it to Rome. And he's on his way to Rome, and they're at sea, and there's just nasty storms for weeks on end. And they're basically preparing to possibly lose their lives, but definitely lose their ship in the storm. And at the end of Acts 27, it is an example of how God's sovereignty and my responsibility work together. And it says this, verse 23, last night an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me and said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar, and God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. So God tells him, look, the lives of everyone who's with you on this ship are going to be spared. A few verses later, verse 30, in an attempt to escape from the ship, the sailors let the lifeboat down into the sea, pretending that they were going to lower some anchors from the bow. Then Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved. Now, they were taking all kinds of measures to save themselves. They were throwing stuff overboard. They were lightening the load. I mean, they were preparing for the worst. Now, Paul could have just stood up and said, look, guys, we're good. God told me last night in a dream that we're all going to be saved, so who cares what we do? I mean, let's just party. Because it doesn't matter what we do. God told me that we're good, so don't stop worrying, No, he stood up and said, look, if you don't stay on this ship, they were trying to get in the lifeboat. They were like, oh, let's get in the lifeboat. He's like, no, if you don't stay on this ship, you are going to die. You cannot be saved. He could have gotten up, like I said, and said, look, guys, it's good. Don't worry about it. God told me we're good. And listen, whenever a prophet of God speaks on behalf of God, the legitimacy is whether or not what they speak becomes true. You read down to the end of the chapter, their lives are spared. Everything is spared. Their lives are spared except for the ship. The ship is destroyed, but their lives are spared. That is how God's knowledge and power work together with our responsibility, with human responsibility. Here is my definition. God is God, and that's it. Thank you. God is God, and that's it. Okay, so what about evil? I haven't gotten to that. Some of you might be wondering. Okay, if God is in control of everything that happens, he's all knowledgeable of all of human history, what about the problem of evil, Mitchell? Because we can look around and see that this world is pretty evil. There's a lot of injustice. There's a lot of evil that exists. Right down to our personal lives when we experience the effects of evil. What about evil? If God is in control of everything, if he's good, then why does evil exist? That is a really tough question. Really tough question. But there's a difference between God permitting evil and causing it. God does not cause evil. He cannot cause evil. He's holy. He's completely holy in every way. He's perfect. He cannot be in the presence of evil. He does not cause it. He permits it. Meaning that he can intervene at any point in human history and stop evil. Now, why he does not, we'll never know the answer to that this side of heaven. And it gets personal, right? When it comes down to our personal lives. It's not just some abstract idea. It gets personal when it becomes our family member, our friend, our diagnosis, our financial condition, our situation. And we often pray, God, why don't you just remove this from my life? Why don't you just remove it? Instead of praying, why don't you remove it, we need to pray, God, what are you doing in the midst of it? Why does he permit it to happen? I don't know the answer to that. And if somebody tells you they know the answer to why God permits a certain act, they're probably lying. God doesn't cause it, he permits it. And so what I want today is I want this to become very personal. It's not just enough for me to explain something that, theology should end up making a difference in your life. It should end up making a difference in your life, the Monday through Friday. So what does God's sovereignty even mean for me? And I think it means two things. First of all, it means that suffering is not without purpose. Purposeful suffering is the reality for the Christ follower. Now, this is the big pushback for those who do not believe. Agnostics and atheists will say, well, if God is so good, then why does evil happen, right? Ever been asked that? Or maybe you've asked it yourself. If God is so good, then why does evil happen? I would say, well, or why does suffering happen? How could a good God allow for X, Y, Z? Insert your own personal suffering or those suffering of someone you know. I would say that you're making an assumption in that, and the assumption is that suffering is without purpose. I believe suffering always has a purpose. God does not allow us to go through a period of suffering just because. He's not going up, There's a purpose in suffering. 1 Peter chapter 4 says, so then those who suffer according to God's will. What does that mean? That's a tough one to take. That it's God's will that we would suffer. Here's why that makes a difference. Because your suffering does not surprise God. He knew about it before you did. He knew you would get the phone call. He knew you would have that conversation. He knew you would get that letter in the mail. He knew that you would be in that circumstance. It does not take him by surprise. It takes us by surprise. Remember, I only see what's a few feet in front of me. He sees beyond that. He sees over the horizon. It does not take him by surprise. I can place my trust in that because he knew it was coming. And because he knew it was coming, in his knowledge, he knows exactly what you need. You don't. I don't. I don't know what I need in that moment. God does. That's purposeful suffering. The second thing is fearless witness. I heard this past week that, we can drift in sort of one of two directions when our tank of trust is low. We can drift towards fear, or we can drift towards anger. So think about yourself. When your trust is low, when the pool of trust or the tank of trust is low, because life, right? Life happens. We're not pretending it doesn't. But when the tank gets low with our trust in God, we drift towards fear or anger. Me personally, I tend to drift towards anger. I don't know why. I think maybe it's my personality or the way I'm wired. I don't know. Others of us, we drift towards fear. I think it's true. We either drift towards fear or anger, and we begin to orchestrate our lives around that. When we drift towards fear, we start to huddle up and we start to isolate ourselves, and we're afraid to take risks, and we're afraid to be vulnerable. We're afraid to be honest. When we drift towards anger, we lash out. We're short with the people that we love the most. We snap. We let it sort of bottle up inside. My wife has to constantly ask me, what's going on? I don't know. I think she has this superpower where she can tell something is wrong. And she'll say, what's going on? And I appreciate that, because it sort of motivates me to talk about what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking. Men, I know there's men in the room where you need that push. You need the push to be like, okay, you know what? I was just really irritated at this today, or whatever it is. But I drift towards anger if I'm low in trust. The song that we just sang is all about, I trust in God. The reason it's important that we believe what we sing is because it has to do with our authenticity. I trust in God. Do you? Are you in a circumstance where that's being put to the test? I trust in God, my Savior, the one who will never fail. Do you really believe that? Does it match your life? You see where, it makes a difference what we believe, because what we believe determines how we behave. That's why this is important, because I want you not to walk out of here with a simple definition of a theological term. I want you to walk out of here with a practical application that makes a difference in your life. Here's the ultimate example of God's sovereignty, the cross of Jesus. Cross of Jesus is the intersection of God's knowledge and human responsibility. God, in his knowledge, knew that Jesus would go to the cross. Scripture tells us that. Jesus was born to die. It is a correct term that Scripture shows us. And yet, we sent him there. Human responsibility is the other part of that. We sent him there. We killed Jesus. We put him on the cross. God knew that was going to happen, and yet we were also responsible for it. That is the intersection of God's power and our responsibility. But I want this to be personal. Jesus said in John 17, "No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord." Jesus knew he was going to the cross, and yet he still, in obedience and submission to the Father's will, went to the cross. He prayed drops of blood, sweat drops of blood in anguish, because he knew the suffering that was coming, and yet he was obedient. So is your God truly sovereign? That's what it comes down to. Is your God truly sovereign? Because the Monday through Friday will answer that question. It will answer the question. If we were able to walk with you Monday through Friday, it would answer that question of whether or not you believe that God is sovereign. Is there a circumstance or a situation right now in which you're drifting towards fear and away from trust in God? Do I truly believe that God is in control of everything that happens? Are you drifting towards anger in a circumstance or a relationship because your trust is lower? I pray that you would be filled with trust again. You would be filled with trust again, because trust is the currency of a strong faith. It's the currency of a strong faith. Now, everything that happens in my life, it doesn't mean that I sit by, right? Everything, God knows everything. It doesn't mean that I sit idly by and just say, oh, okay, God's in control, twiddle my thumbs. It means I get involved in the mission. I believe in the sovereignty of God, and I also believe He's given me responsibility to make heaven a reality on earth, to bring heaven to earth, to reflect the kingdom of God. That's why it's important that we go beyond Sunday. Okay? Following Jesus is about more than Sunday. I'll probably say that every week, so just get used to it. Around here, following Jesus is about more than Sunday. We are in a couple weeks. The blizzard of 2025 may try to keep us from getting our groups up and running, but I'll put snow tires on. I don't care. Tammy mentioned we have groups starting. We have a couple of groups. I want to just highlight two. You have choices, and pick up one of these at the desk. Come see us. Tammy and I will be out there. Come say hello. And if you like to get up early on Sunday morning, you can come to the Sunday 9 a.m. group led by Derek and Dawn. Raise your hand, Derek and Dawn. They're great. They're great. They're awesome. They're leading a group at 9 a.m. If you're not in a group, I want to strongly encourage you, as best I can without twisting your arm, and I might resort to that. Show up 9 a.m. If you need childcare, we'll figure it out. 9 a.m. before service. If you are not a morning person, and you want to listen to me twice a week, maybe one or two of you. Wednesday nights at 6 o'clock, we have Rooted. Okay, I'll be leading it. Rooted is, like Tammy said, it's not a small group. It's just a group experience where we walk through the rhythms of a Christ follower. And come see me afterwards. You can also sign up online. I'd love to see 20 people get connected in a small group. I'd love to see everybody in the church in a small group, 100%. 100%. What if everybody in the church, I'm just going to go on a little rant here. I got time. If everybody in the church got connected, I promise you, we would see transformation happen. Okay? I want you to show up on Sunday. Please don't hear me incorrectly. Sunday is when we gather. We gather to be encouraged, to be equipped by the word, to go back out. Okay? We gather to scatter, is how I say it. The places we live, work, and play. That's the mission of the church, to be the church in the places we live, work, and play. You got to get connected, okay? Sunday, 9 o'clock, or Wednesday at 6 o'clock. And there's some other opportunities. Those primarily those are great. And like I said, 20 people, if we can get 20 people, if you're not in a group, get in a group. I want to make it really hard not to be in a group here. Okay, I'm not trying to shame anyone. I'm not trying to, but I want you to think about, that's just what we do here. Okay? And this is what we do here. It is not enough when it comes to God's mission to just have a service for 60 minutes once a week. We are not going to do that. This is not the church for you if that's all you want. Okay? I don't know if I'll get in trouble for saying that. Maybe not. So Sunday morning, Wednesday night, okay? And the other thing is, I'm just preaching the announcements. We have a new partnership with Promise 686. They are a nonprofit organization that assists foster families. Comes out of Isaiah 68:6, which says, God sets the lonely in families. Promise 686 helps meet the needs of foster families by connecting people in the church directly with the foster family to meet needs. So here's how that works. You sign up to be a responder. It's called a responder team. I don't know if we have a slide. Maybe not. Maybe not. I'll just say it. We have a responder team, and you sign up to get notifications of needs. So it'll send you an email. It'll say the need. The caseworker puts the need in the system, and you get the notification. And it's all sorts of things. It could be a mattress. It could be clothing. It's anything that a foster family is in need of, and you meet the need directly. Like, you get an opportunity to meet that need directly by taking it to the family or arranging for a meeting spot and, praying with them, for them, to be the church. You get an opportunity to be the church. We're kind of soft rolling this out. We've got a handful of people who have already signed up. We're going to have a training next month on Zoom to just sort of equip everybody. But again, that's an opportunity to take responsibility. Say, God is in control. Yeah, I certainly want to pray for families, but I have a job to do too. And that's how I want us to look at it. So if you have a heart to just meet the needs of foster families, and you can do that, come see me after. I'll be in the lobby. But get in a group, and then get involved with the Promise 686. And baptism Sunday. This is like a church meeting. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up. They say you should never do this, but whatever. They're not here, the people who say that. Baptism Sunday is February 9th. I talked to somebody before service. They came to me and they said, I want to be baptized. I said, well, that's awesome. And, first of all. Second of all, what sort of led you to this? And they said, well, I've been thinking about it for a while, and now I think it's time. I was like, great. And if others of you have been thinking about baptism, or you have questions, I know I've talked to several people in the last few weeks who are planning or wanting to be baptized. I want to encourage you, take that step. If you have questions, let's talk. I have something I can send you with some FAQs about why baptism, why it's important, what it means. But we're going to have baptism February 9th. And I want to ask the whole church to join me in praying for that day, because I believe it can be a catalyst for movement of God. I pray there are planned baptisms. I pray there are spontaneous baptisms. So join me in praying, and if you are considering it, take that step. Let's talk, okay? That's the end of announcements. Let me pray, and then we'll take communion. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for this gathering. I pray that we've been encouraged. I pray that we've been convicted where needed by the Spirit. I pray that we've been edified by your word. So God, let it take root. Let it take root that we would trust in your sovereignty. You're in complete control, and at the same time, what we do matters. Help us.